Tonight, we step into the blood-soaked sand of the Colosseum, into a world where death was entertainment and freedom was earned one brutal fight at a time. Not a Hollywood hero with perfect teeth and choreographed moves, but a real gladiator. Scarred, desperate, and fighting not just for glory, but for the simple right to see another sunrise. Before we begin this journey into the heart of Rome's most brutal spectacle, take a moment to like this video if you enjoy these deep dives into history's forgotten voices. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what draws you to these ancient stories. Now settle in, maybe dim the lights, and let's walk together through the gates of hell that Romans called entertainment. You don't choose to become a gladiator. The arena chooses you, usually at the worst possible moment of your life. Maybe you're a captured enemy soldier, still bleeding from wounds that haven't healed, still dreaming of a home that no longer exists. Maybe you're a criminal whose crime was being poor, desperate, or simply in the wrong place when the magistrates needed someone to blame. Or maybe, and this is somehow worse, you're a debtor whose family sold you to pay for grain, wine, and the privilege of not starving this winter. You arrive at the ludus, the gladiator school, in chains. Iron links that have rubbed your wrists raw during the long journey from wherever your old life ended. The first thing you notice isn't the training weapons or the practice posts. It's the smell, sweat, blood, fear, and something else. Something that takes you a moment to identify. Hope. Desperate, irrational hope clinging to men who know they're probably going to die, but can't quite accept it yet. The lanista, the owner of this particular collection of human weapons, looks you up and down like you're livestock. Which, legally speaking, you are. He checks your teeth, feels your arms, asks you to walk, then run, then stop. He nods to his assistant, who makes a note on a wax tablet. You've been categorized, priced, and assigned a value based on how long they think you'll last and how much the crowd will pay to watch you die. Your first night is spent in a cell barely larger than a burial niche, which is probably intentional. The walls are stone, the floor is straw that smells like the previous occupant didn't make it out alive. There's a small window, too high to reach, that lets in just enough moonlight to remind you that somewhere out there, free people are sleeping in real beds, dreaming about normal things like market days and harvest festivals. You share this space with 3 other men. One is a Gaul with arms like tree trunks who speaks no Latin and spends the night sharpening a piece of metal he somehow acquired. Another is a thin man from Syria who cries quietly in a language you don't recognize. The third is a Roman citizen, or was, before debt and bad luck landed him here. He tells you, in the precise Latin of the educated, that the average gladiator survives 5 fights. Some make it to 10. A precious few earn their freedom. Most earn a shallow grave outside the city walls. You don't sleep. How could you? Tomorrow, your real education begins. Dawn arrives with the sound of a whip cracking, not on flesh but on stone. The sound echoes through the ludus like thunder, and everyone moves. Fast. You learn quickly that everything here happens at the speed of violence or not at all. Breakfast is barley porridge, watered wine, and bread that's hard enough to use as a weapon. You eat standing up because sitting down takes too long and shows weakness. The other gladiators watch you eat, not with hostility, but with the detached interest of men betting on whether you'll still be alive next week. Your trainer is a retired gladiator named Marcus, a man whose face looks like a map of every fight he survived. His left eye is white from an old wound, his right hand is missing 2 fingers, and when he speaks, you can see gaps where teeth used to be. He's alive, which in this place makes him practically a god. Forget everything you think you know about fighting, he tells you, circling like a predator sizing up prey. In the streets, you fight to win. In the arena, you fight to survive. Sometimes those are the same thing. Often they're not. He hands you a wooden sword, a gladius that's been worn smooth by countless hands, most of them now dust. The weight is wrong, the balance is off, and the grip feels like it was made for someone else's hand. It probably was. Your first lesson, Marcus says, drawing his own practice sword. is that the crowd doesn't care if you win. They care if you entertain. A boring victory gets you hissed. A glorious defeat gets you cheered. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it gets you mercy. He attacks without warning. Not hard, not trying to hurt you, just testing. You stumble backward, nearly trip over your own feet, and swing wildly at empty air. He taps you on the shoulder with his wooden blade. Dead, he announces matter-of-factly. Again. You reset, try to think, try to anticipate. He attacks from a different angle. This time, you manage to block, barely, but your counterattack is so slow and obvious that he has time to tap you on the head, the chest, and the thigh before you even complete the swing. Dead, and bleeding out, he says. Again. This continues for what feels like hours but is probably minutes. You die in dozens of creative ways, according to Marcus's running commentary. Disemboweled, decapitated, punctured in various vital organs, and once, memorably, tripped over your own sword and impaled yourself, which would be hilarious if it weren't so pathetic. By the time he calls a break, you're soaked in sweat, your arms feel like overcooked grain, and you have a new understanding of how much you don't know about violence. Not terrible, Marcus says, which you suspect is high praise in this place. You didn't cry, you didn't quit, and you only wet yourself a little. We can work with that. You look down. Your tunic is indeed damp with more than just sweat. You hadn't even noticed. It happens, the Syrian from your cell says quietly. Fear is just your body being honest about your situation. That afternoon, you learn about gladiator types. Not because it's interesting, but because knowing the difference between a retiarius and a secutor might be the difference between dying quickly and dying slowly. The retiarius fights with a net and trident, minimal armor, maximum mobility. He's fast, tricky, and usually dead by his third fight, because speed only gets you so far when your opponent is wearing half a blacksmith's shop worth of metal. The secutor is the retiarius's natural enemy, heavily armored, built like a mobile fortress, and about as graceful as a drunk ox. He wins by outlasting his opponent, letting them exhaust themselves against his shield and armor, then finishing them when they can barely lift their weapon. The Murmillo fights with sword and shield, wearing a distinctive fish-crested helmet. Solid, dependable, the kind of gladiator who puts on a good show without too much unnecessary flair. They last longer than most because they're predictable, and crowds like predictable. The Thraex uses a small shield and a curved sword, fighting in a style borrowed from Thracian warriors. Fast, aggressive, and theatrical. They either win spectacularly or die spectacularly. There's rarely a middle ground. There are others. The provocator, the hoplomachus, the Esidarius, who fights from a chariot. Each with their own weapons, their own armor, their own way of dying for the entertainment of people who will forget their names before the next course is served. What am I? You ask Marcus. He studies you for a long moment, taking in your height, your build, the way you move when you think no one is watching. You're raw material, he says finally. We'll see what shapes up when we start hammering. The hammering begins immediately. Your days now follow a rhythm as precise and unforgiving as a funeral march. Dawn, porridge, training. Noon, bread and watered wine, more training. Evening, whatever passes for dinner, weapon maintenance, and collapse into your straw, hoping your muscles will remember how to work tomorrow. Training isn't just about swinging a sword. It's about learning to die properly. The gladiator games aren't random violence. They're theater, deadly theater, and you're both actor and prop. You learn the signals, how to appeal to the crowd when you're losing, how to acknowledge defeat with dignity, how to die well if it comes to that, which statistically speaking, it probably will. There's an art to falling, to bleeding dramatically without actually dying immediately, to making your death meaningful enough that the crowd feels they got their money's worth. The crowd wants a story, Marcus explains, demonstrating the proper way to collapse when mortally wounded. Give them a hero's death and they might remember you. Give them a coward's death and you'll be forgotten before they finish their wine. You practice dying dozens of times. Sword wounds, spear thrusts, The peculiar choreography of combat that looks real enough to thrill spectators, but controlled enough that accidents are minimized. Though accidents happen. The sand of the practice arena is stained dark in several places where practice became permanent. Weapon training is constant and brutal. Your sword arm develops muscles you didn't know existed. Your shield arm grows strong enough to block blows that would shatter normal bones. Your legs learn to keep moving even when your lungs are screaming for air and your vision is starting to tunnel. But it's not just physical. They're training your mind too, breaking down whatever you used to be and rebuilding you into something that can function in front of a bloodthirsty crowd without freezing in terror. You learn to read opponents, to spot tells and weaknesses, the way a man shifts his weight before attacking, the slight drop of a shoulder that telegraphs which direction a blow is coming from. The moment when exhaustion starts to slow reflexes and create openings. More importantly, you learn to control your own tells, to fight without revealing your intentions, to mask pain and fatigue behind a warrior's mask that gives nothing away. Some nights, when training is done and your body is too tired to rebel, you lie on your straw and try to remember who you were before this place. But those memories feel increasingly distant, like stories someone told you about a stranger. That person who had a name, a family, hopes that extended beyond surviving until next week. He's fading. In his place, something harder is taking shape. After 3 months of this daily crucifixion, Marcus makes an announcement that changes everything. You're ready for your first fight. You're not ready. You know you're not ready. The other gladiators know you're not ready. But ready is a luxury the Ludus can't afford. You've cost them money for 3 months. Time to see if you're an investment or just expensive meat. The night before your first fight, you don't sleep. Not because you're not tired, you're always tired now, but because sleep feels like giving up time you might not get back. The Syrian from your cell has been replaced by a new man, a German with scars that tell stories you don't want to hear. The Roman citizen is still there, but he's different now. Quieter. His educated Latin has been replaced by the clipped, efficient language of the arena. He's survived 2 fights, which makes him practically a veteran. Any advice? You ask him. He's quiet for so long you think he's fallen asleep. Then he speaks, his voice barely audible above the sound of breathing and distant sobbing from other cells. Don't think about the crowd. Don't think about dying. Don't think about winning. Just think about the next heartbeat, the next breath, the next move. String enough of those together and maybe you see another sunset. He rolls over, ending the conversation. You spend the remaining hours until dawn trying to follow his advice, focusing on immediate, simple things. The feeling of straw against your back, the sound of your own breathing, the weight of the wooden gladius you're allowed to keep in your cell now, a sign that you're no longer considered completely hopeless. But your mind keeps wandering to tomorrow, to the arena, to the sand that will either launch your career or serve as your grave. Dawn comes too soon, and not soon enough. The day of your first fight arrives with all the ceremony of an execution, which, statistically speaking, it probably is. You're awakened before sunrise by guards who speak only in grunts and gestures. There's no breakfast, just watered wine that tastes like courage mixed with desperation. You're taken to a different part of the Ludus, rooms you've never seen before. Here, gladiators prepare not just their bodies, but their personas. Because you're not just fighting today, you're performing. A slave oils your skin until it gleams, making muscles stand out and scars more visible. Another slave applies kohl around your eyes, not for beauty, but to make your expressions more dramatic in the arena's harsh sunlight. Your hair is arranged in whatever style matches your fighting category. Everything is calculated for maximum visual impact. Your armor is brought out, and for the first time, you understand the weight of what you're about to do. This isn't practice equipment. This is real bronze and iron, polished to mirror brightness, decorated with engravings that tell stories of victories you haven't earned yet. The helmet is the hardest part. Once it goes on, you stop being whoever you used to be. You become a gladiator, a thing for the crowd's entertainment. The world becomes filtered through metal eye slits, sounds become muffled, breathing becomes conscious effort. Marcus appears beside you, checking straps and fittings with the care of a man preparing a sacrifice. "Remember," he says, his voice echoing strangely inside your helmet, "you're not trying to kill him quickly. You're trying to put on a show. Make it last. Make it dramatic. Give the crowd their money's worth, and maybe they'll let you live." You nod, though the movement feels strange and heavy with the helmet's weight. Other gladiators are preparing around you. Some are veterans, calm and methodical, going through routines they've performed dozens of times. Others are new like you, their nervousness visible in the way their hands shake as they adjust their equipment. One veteran, a massive German who fights as a murmillo, notices your stare. "First time?" he asks in heavily accented Latin. You nod. "Good. Fear keeps you alive longer than confidence." He returns to adjusting his shin guards. "Confidence makes you stupid. Fear makes you careful." A horn sounds in the distance. The games are beginning. You're led through tunnels you've never seen, underground passages that smell of sawdust, blood, and fear. The sound of the crowd grows louder with each step, a rumbling that vibrates in your chest and makes your armor rattle. Finally, you reach a gate. Beyond it, you can see sunlight so bright it hurts your eyes, and sand so white it looks like crushed bone. Which it probably is. The crowd's roar hits you like a physical force. 50,000 voices screaming, cheering, demanding blood. Your blood, specifically, or your opponent's. They're not particular as long as someone bleeds entertainingly. You step into the arena. The Colosseum is bigger than you imagined, impossibly vast, rising up around you like a man-made mountain. The crowd is a blur of faces, togas, and waving hands. Somewhere up there, in the imperial box, sits the emperor himself, the man who will decide whether you live or die if the fight goes badly. But you don't have time to gawk. Your opponent is already waiting. He's a retiarius, which means net and trident, speed and trickery. He's been doing this longer than you can tell by the way he moves, the casual confidence with which he tests his weapon and acknowledges the crowd's cheers. You've been assigned the role of secutor, heavy armor, and methodical attack. You're the tortoise to his hare, the fortress to his lightning. In theory, your armor protects you while you wait for him to make a mistake. In practice, you're about to find out if theory survives contact with a three-pronged spear aimed at your face. The editor, the official in charge of the games, raises his hand. The crowd quiets to a dull roar, like distant thunder. "Gladiatores!" he calls out, his voice somehow carrying over the noise. "Morituri te salutant!" Gladiators, those who are about to die, salute you. The traditional greeting, though you're not sure if you're saluting the editor, the emperor, or death itself. The editor's hand drops. The fight begins. Your opponent moves immediately, circling to your right, looking for an angle. His net is folded in his left hand, ready to be cast. His trident is in his right, its points gleaming with what you hope is just oil. You try to remember everything Marcus taught you. Keep your shield up, control the distance, don't let him get behind you. Watch for the net. Most importantly, make it look good. He feints with the trident, testing your reactions. You respond by raising your shield, and the crowd approves with a cheer. Good, you're both playing your parts. He tries again, this time coming closer, the trident's points probing for gaps in your armor. You swipe at him with your gladius, not trying to hit, just establishing distance. He dances back, and the crowd cheers his agility. This continues for several minutes, a deadly dance where each partner knows the steps, but not the ending. You're both working, both sweating under the brutal sun, but neither is in real danger yet. This is the opening act, building tension before the real violence begins. Then he makes his move. The net flies out, a brown blur of rope and weights, aimed not at you, but at your feet. You try to jump back, but you're not quite fast enough. The net catches your left leg, and suddenly you're off balance, hopping on one foot while trying to maintain your guard. The crowd loves it. The sound of their approval crashes over you like a wave. Your opponent rushes in, trident aimed at your exposed side. This is it, the moment that separates the living from the dead. Training takes over. You can't move your left leg, but you can pivot on your right. You swing your shield around, catching the trident on its rim and deflecting it just enough that the points scrape across your armor instead of punching through it. The impact sends shockwaves through your arm, but you're still alive. You slash with your gladius, aiming for his exposed thigh. He jerks back, but not quite fast enough. Your blade draws blood, a thin red line across his leg. First blood to you. The crowd roars approval, but you're still tangled in the net, and he's not done. He abandons the trident, drawing a pugio, a short dagger, for close work. Now it becomes a wrestling match, him trying to get inside your guard where your longer sword is useless, you trying to maintain distance while dealing with the net around your leg. You fall. Not dramatically, just off balance and down in the sand, which immediately sticks to your oiled skin and gets in your eyes. He's on you immediately, dagger probing for gaps in your armor. This is where most gladiators die, pinned and helpless while their opponent finds the killing spot. But Marcus prepared you for this too. You grab a handful of sand and fling it at his face. He reels back, momentarily blinded, and you roll away, finally kicking free of the net. Both of you are back on your feet, breathing hard, bleeding lightly, and giving the crowd exactly what they paid for. The fight continues, but something has changed. You're no longer the terrified slave who walked into the arena. You're a gladiator who has drawn blood and survived the first real exchange. Confidence, dangerous confidence, begins to build. Your opponent senses it too. He's more cautious now, more respectful. You've proven you're not easy prey. The end, when it comes, is almost anticlimactic. He tries the net again, but this time you're ready. You catch it on your shield and jerk hard, pulling him off balance. When he stumbles forward, your gladius is waiting. The point takes him in the shoulder, not a killing blow, but deep enough to matter. He drops the net, staggers back, and looks at the blood running down his arm with something like surprise. The crowd is on its feet, screaming. Not for blood now, but for conclusion. They want to see how this story ends. Your opponent raises his left hand, the signal of surrender. The crowd's roar becomes deafening, a wall of sound that makes your bones vibrate. All eyes turn to the imperial box, where the emperor will decide your opponent's fate. And yours, since showing mercy to a defeated foe reflects on the victor's character. The emperor studies the scene for what feels like hours, but is probably seconds. Your opponent kneels in the sand, wounded but not mortally, having fought well enough to deserve consideration. The emperor's thumb appears. Not down, signaling death. Not up, signaling mercy. Horizontal, extended, meaning the decision is yours. You look down at your defeated opponent. He fought well, gave the crowd a good show, drew your blood before you drew his. Under different circumstances, you might have been friends. But this isn't about friendship. This is about survival, yours and his. You step back and raise your own hand, signaling that you spare his life. The crowd explodes in approval. Mercy is popular today, apparently. Officials rush onto the sand to tend to your opponent's wound and escort him from the arena. Others approach you with a palm branch, the symbol of victory, and a purse of coins, your share of the gate receipts. You've won your first fight. More importantly, you've survived it. As you walk from the arena, the crowd's cheers still ringing in your ears, you realize something has fundamentally changed. You entered the Colosseum as a slave with a sword. You're leaving as a gladiator with a reputation. One fight down, 4 more, if the statistics hold, before you join the majority of your profession in death. But for tonight, you're alive, you're fed, and you have coin in your purse. In this place, at this time, that makes you rich beyond measure. Victory tastes like sand, sweat, and blood that isn't entirely your own, but it also tastes like something else. Something you'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Your first victory changes everything and nothing. You're still a slave, still property, still scheduled to die for entertainment. But now you're property with a record. 1 win, 0 losses, still breathing. In the gladiator business, that makes you a rising star. The crowd loves a winner, but they love a story more. And every gladiator who survives his first fight becomes, briefly, a story. The lanista knows this, understands that your value just increased significantly. Dead gladiators earn nothing. Living gladiators, especially ones the crowd remembers favorably, earn coin. Your accommodations improve marginally. Instead of sharing a cell with 3 other men, you now share with only 2. Your straw is fresher, your portions slightly larger, you're even given a small oil lamp allowing you to see after dark. Luxury, by Ludus standards. But the real change is in how the other gladiators treat you. Before, you were just another piece of fresh meat waiting to be ground up. Now you're a colleague, someone who might actually last long enough to be worth knowing. The Roman citizen who gave you advice before your first fight nods approvingly when he sees you return. Clean kill? He asks. Spared him, you reply. He considers this for a moment. Good choice. Mercy plays well with the crowd, and that Retiarius has friends. Better to have him owe you a favor than have his friends want revenge. This is gladiator politics, something they don't teach you in training, but which can be the difference between a long career and a short funeral. Your second fight comes 3 weeks later, enough time for your bruises to fade and your confidence to crystallize into something dangerous. Confidence kills gladiators faster than enemy weapons, Marcus warned you, and now you understand why. Walking into your second fight, you feel different, less terrified, more professional. You know what the sand feels like under your feet, how the crowd sounds when they smell blood, how your armor moves when you're fighting for your life. Experience, even limited experience, is a weapon. Your opponent this time is a Thryax, a Thracian-style fighter with a small shield and a curved sword. He's young, probably newer than you, but big and strong and desperate in the way that makes men unpredictable. The fight is harder than your first, not because your opponent is more skilled, but because you're more cautious. Victory has given you something to lose, namely your life and your newly improved circumstances. Fear kept you sharp in your first fight. Comfort makes you sloppy in your second. The Thrax comes at you aggressively, trying to end things quickly. His curved sword is perfect for hooking around shields and finding gaps in armor, but it requires him to get close, closer than is safe against a Secutor's longer reach. You let him come, using your shield and armor to absorb his attacks while looking for openings. This is what Secutors do: outlast their opponents. Let their aggression tire them out, then strike when they slow down. It works, but barely. By the time you land the decisive blow, a thrust to his thigh that drops him to one knee, you're exhausted and bleeding from 6 minor cuts where his curved blade found gaps in your armor. Again you show mercy. Again the crowd approves. Again you walk away with victory, coins, and a growing reputation. 2 fights, 2 wins, still breathing. Your third opponent is a veteran Murmillo, a man who survived 8 fights and earned enough coin to buy better equipment. His shield is reinforced with bronze, his armor perfectly fitted, his gladius sharp enough to shave with. This fight teaches you the difference between beating desperate newcomers and facing a professional killer. The veteran doesn't waste energy on flashy moves or crowd-pleasing flourishes. He fights efficiently, economically, looking for the one mistake that will end you. You make several mistakes, but none quite fatal enough. A thrust that goes wide when you overextend. A moment where you drop your guard while breathing hard. A stumble when the sand shifts under your feet. Each time he punishes the error without quite capitalizing on it. He's not trying to kill you quickly. He's teaching you, showing you how much you still don't know, wearing you down systematically. The crowd grows restless. This isn't the explosive violence they paid to see. It's a clinic, a master craftsman demonstrating his art on an enthusiastic amateur. Finally, inevitably, you make the mistake that matters. You commit too fully to an attack, leaving yourself open for the counter that every gladiator learns to fear. His gladius takes you in the side, sliding between armor plates and into flesh with the smooth efficiency of practice. Not deep enough to kill immediately, but deep enough to matter. You're hurt, really hurt, for the first time in the arena. Blood runs down your side, warm and sticky, soaking into the sand. Your breathing becomes shallow, careful, each deep breath sending fire through your ribs. But you're not done. Pain changes the fight's dynamic. The crowd, sensing blood, comes alive. Your opponent, professional that he is, knows wounded animals are dangerous and adjusts his tactics accordingly. What follows is the longest 10 minutes of your life. You fight hurt, moving carefully, conserving energy, looking for the one moment when his attention lapses or his guard drops. It comes when he steps wrong on blood-soaked sand and slips slightly. Not much, just a moment of instability, but enough. Your gladius finds the gap between his helmet and shoulder guard, a thrust that would have taken his head if you'd been an inch to the left. Instead, it opens a gash across his neck that bleeds impressively but isn't immediately fatal. He staggers, touches the wound, looks at his bloody fingers with surprise. Then he looks at you with something like respect. "Well fought," he says, barely audible over the crowd's roar. Then he raises his hand in surrender. This time, when the emperor's thumb appears, it points up. Mercy for a warrior who gave good value and showed skill. 3 fights, 3 wins, still breathing, but now truly bloodied. As you leave the arena, leaning slightly to favor your wounded side, you realize something important. You're no longer fighting just to survive. You're fighting to win, to excel, to earn not just another day but another victory. The transformation is complete. You're no longer a slave with a sword. You're a gladiator with ambition. By the time your 5th fight arrives, 6 months after your first, you've developed something that would have seemed impossible when you first arrived at the Ludus. A reputation, not just as a survivor, which is merely staying alive, but as an entertainer, which is staying alive profitably. The crowd knows your name now, or at least the name the arena announcer uses when introducing you. They cheer when you enter, not just from bloodlust, but from recognition. You've become a character in their ongoing drama, someone they have opinions about. Your 4th fight had been against another veteran, this one a retiarius who'd survived 12 combats. That fight had been a masterclass in patience, both of you too experienced to make obvious mistakes, too professional to waste energy on spectacular but inefficient moves. It lasted nearly an hour, by far the longest fight of your career, with both of you bleeding from multiple wounds by the end. When you finally landed the decisive blow, a perfect thrust that slipped between his ribs and punctured his lung, the crowd gave you the kind of sustained standing ovation usually reserved for chariot races and executions of particularly hated criminals. You'd spared him too, though he died anyway 3 days later from infection. Mercy, you'd learned, doesn't always save lives, but it always improves your reputation. Now, entering your 5th fight, you're no longer just another gladiator. You're a draw, someone people pay specifically to see. The lanista has raised your asking price, and your living conditions have improved accordingly. You now have a cell to yourself, better food, and even a personal slave to maintain your equipment. Your opponent for the 5th fight is different from the others. He's not a veteran or a desperate newcomer. He's a volunteer, a free citizen who chose to enter the arena for money and fame. These are the most dangerous opponents because they're not fighting for survival or freedom. They're fighting for glory, which makes them unpredictable. His name is Lucius, and he fights as a provocator, with balanced armor and weapons designed for long tactical fights. He's been training for this moment for years, preparing specifically to make his mark against established gladiators like you. The fight is different from the beginning. There's less desperation, more craft. Both of you are skilled enough to appreciate the other's technique, professional enough to acknowledge good moves even while trying to counter them. This is gladiatorial combat at its highest level, 2 experts testing each other's skills while giving the crowd the kind of sophisticated violence they rarely get to see. The turning point comes when Lucius attempts a complex combination attack that you've never seen before. It's brilliant, well executed, and almost impossible to counter. Almost. You manage to slip the killing blow by a hair's breadth, close enough that his blade cuts the leather ties on your shoulder guard, leaving the armor hanging loose. But in avoiding his attack, you create an opening he's too skilled to miss. His follow-up thrust takes you in the thigh, deep enough to hit the bone. You're hurt, badly hurt, worse than in any previous fight. Your leg won't support your full weight, and blood loss is making you lightheaded. But Lucius has made a mistake. In pressing his advantage, he's moved too close, inside the reach where your gladius is most effective. The thrust that ends the fight is perfect, textbook technique executed with the desperation of a man who knows he's out of options. Your blade slips between his ribs and finds his heart with surgical precision. He looks down at the blade protruding from his chest with something like curiosity, then at you with unmistakable respect. "Perfect," he whispers, loud enough for only you to hear. Then he falls forward into the sand. The crowd's reaction is unlike anything you've experienced. Not just cheering, but something approaching awe. They've just witnessed something special, a fight that will be talked about for years. As you limp from the arena, supported by slaves because your wounded leg won't hold you, you realize you've achieved something remarkable. You've survived 5 fights, the average career length for a gladiator. Everything from here is borrowed time, but more than that, you've become something the arena rarely produces, an artist of violence, someone who doesn't just fight, but performs, who doesn't just win, but inspires. 5 fights, 5 wins, still breathing, and now truly dangerous. The mathematics of gladiatorial combat are simple and brutal. Most die within their first 5 fights. You've just passed that threshold, which makes you either very lucky or very good. The smart money is usually on luck, but luck doesn't account for the precision with which you dispatched Lucius, or the tactical awareness you showed against the veteran Murmillo. Word of your 5th victory spreads beyond the usual arena gossip. Senators mention your name at dinner parties. Wealthy merchants place bets on your future fights. Most importantly, the imperial household takes notice, which is both an honor and a death sentence waiting to happen. Your living conditions improve again. You're moved to the veterans section of the ludus, where gladiators who've survived long enough to be considered investments rather than expenses are housed. Your cell now has a real bed, a table, even a small shrine where you can make offerings to whatever gods you think might be listening. The training changes, too. Instead of learning basic techniques, you're now studying advanced tactics, the subtle arts that separate good gladiators from legendary ones. How to read a crowd's mood and adjust your fighting style accordingly. How to make a wound look worse than it is for dramatic effect. How to turn an opponent's strength against him through misdirection and timing. But with the respect due to someone who has proven himself in the crucible where most men simply die. "You're past the breaking point now," he tells you one evening as you practice against a wooden post. Your movements fluid and economical in ways that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. Most gladiators who make it this far develop what kills them: arrogance. They start believing their own legend, thinking they're invincible. He circles you as you continue your forms, watching for flaws with the eye of a man who's seen too many promising fighters die from overconfidence. The arena doesn't care about your record. It doesn't care about your reputation. Every fight is your first fight. Every opponent is the one who might kill you. Remember that, and you might see your 10th victory. Forget it, and you'll be dead before your 7th. Your 6th fight comes 2 months later, against a gladiator whose reputation makes even the veterans nervous. His name is Brutus, though whether that's his real name or an arena persona, no one knows. What everyone knows is that he's never lost a fight in 4 years of competition, and he's killed more opponents than he's spared. Brutus fights as a Murmillo, but he's modified the traditional equipment with personal touches that speak to his experience and skill. His shield is reinforced with bands of iron that can break an opponent's weapon. His helmet is decorated with the plumes of exotic birds, a display of wealth that comes from prize money. His gladius is longer than standard, custom forged by the finest smiths in Rome. More unsettling than his equipment is his demeanor. Where most gladiators show some nervousness before a fight, some acknowledgement of mortality, Brutus appears completely calm. He prepares for battle with the methodical efficiency of a craftsman going to work. The crowd's anticipation is palpable as you enter the arena. This isn't just another fight. It's a test of whether you're a genuine contender or just another promising newcomer who got lucky for a while. Brutus represents the highest level of gladiatorial combat, the standard against which all others are measured. When the fight begins, you understand immediately why Brutus has never lost. He doesn't just fight. He controls the entire combat from the first moment. Every move is calculated, every attack precisely timed, every defense perfectly positioned. He's not trying to kill you quickly. He's dissecting your technique, learning your patterns, identifying your weaknesses. It's like being studied by a predator that has all the time in the world to choose the perfect moment to strike. For the first 10 minutes, you're completely defensive, using every trick Marcus taught you just to stay alive. Brutus attacks with mechanical precision, each strike testing a different aspect of your defense. Your shield work, your footwork, your ability to counterattack under pressure. You realize with growing horror that he's not just fighting you, he's evaluating you. Like a gladiator master examining a new student, except this examination ends with your death if you fail. The crowd grows restless. They want blood, drama, the spectacular violence they paid to see. What they're getting is a clinical demonstration of superior skill slowly wearing down inferior technique. That's when you understand what you have to do. You can't outfight Brutus. He's simply better than you are. But you can outthink him, do something he doesn't expect, break his rhythm, and create the chaos where skill matters less than desperation. You deliberately overextend on an attack, leaving yourself open in a way that screams amateur mistake. Brutus takes the bait, moving in for what should be an easy killing blow. But you're not where you appear to be. The overextension was a feint, and as his gladius cuts through empty air where your torso should have been, your own blade finds the gap between his arm guard and shoulder plate. It's not a deep wound, but it's first blood, and more importantly, it's the first time in 4 years that anyone has surprised Brutus in the arena. The crowd erupts. They've just witnessed something unprecedented. Brutus caught off guard, Brutus bleeding, Brutus looking at an opponent with something approaching respect. The fight changes completely. Brutus abandons his methodical approach, his calm superiority. Now he's fighting with the intensity of a man whose reputation is at stake. And you, having tasted his blood, press your advantage with the desperation of someone who knows this moment of equality won't last long. What follows is gladiatorial combat at its most brutal and beautiful. Two skilled fighters abandoning caution, trading blow for blow, each seeking the decisive moment that will end the contest. You're both bleeding now, both exhausted, both pushed beyond the limits of normal endurance. The crowd is on its feet, screaming approval for what they're witnessing. Not just violence, but artistry elevated by mortal stakes. The end comes suddenly. Brutus attempts a complex maneuver, a spinning attack that should have taken your head off. You duck under it and thrust upward, your gladius finding the gap between his helmet and gorget. The point penetrates just far enough to nick his throat, not deeply enough to kill, but precisely enough to demonstrate that you could have. That if you'd been a fraction more aggressive, Rome's most feared gladiator would be bleeding out in the sand. Brutus freezes, feeling the steel against his throat, understanding exactly how close he came to dying. Then, slowly, he steps back and raises his hand in surrender. The silence that follows is deafening. For a moment, 50,000 people are too stunned to react. Then the noise begins, a roar that shakes the Colosseum's foundations and seems to go on forever. You've done the impossible. You've defeated Brutus, the undefeated champion, the gold standard of gladiatorial excellence. More than that, you've done it without killing him, showing mercy to a man who rarely showed it to others. The emperor himself stands in the imperial box, applauding. This isn't just approval. It's recognition that you've achieved something genuinely extraordinary. As you help Brutus to his feet, he looks at you with something you've never seen in his eyes before, uncertainty. How? He asks quietly, his voice barely audible over the crowd's continuing roar. You taught me, you reply. Every move you made, every technique you showed me, I learned from watching you fight. You're still the better gladiator. I just got lucky. He considers this, then nods slowly. Lucky, maybe, but lucky with skill. That's the most dangerous combination in the arena. 6 fights, 6 wins, and now you've beaten the unbeatable. Your name is no longer just known, it's celebrated. Poets write verses about your victory over Brutus. Artists sketch your likeness on pottery. Children in the streets play gladiator games and argue over who gets to be you. But success in the arena is like standing on a mountain peak in a lightning storm. The higher you climb, the more likely you are to be struck down. Your 7th fight is against a gladiator whose approach is completely different from Brutus's methodical perfection. His name is Gaius, and he fights with the wild unpredictability of someone who has nothing left to lose. He's been sentenced to death for murdering a senator's son in a tavern brawl, and his only hope of survival is to earn enough victories to buy his freedom. This makes him the most dangerous kind of opponent, skilled enough to be lethal, desperate enough to take risks that sane gladiators would never attempt. The fight is a whirlwind of violence from the first moment. Gaius attacks with suicidal aggression, throwing himself into combinations that should leave him open for counterattacks but happen so quickly that you barely have time to defend, let alone respond. He's willing to trade wounds, to accept damage in exchange for dealing damage. His strategy is simple: hurt you faster than you hurt him, and hope his superior desperation carries him through. It nearly works. Within minutes, you're bleeding from half a dozen cuts, your armor dented and hanging loose in places. But desperation, while dangerous, also makes fighters sloppy. Gaius's attacks are powerful but increasingly wild, driven more by emotion than technique. The decisive moment comes when he attempts a berserker charge, running straight at you with his gladius extended, betting everything on a single all-or-nothing attack. You sidestep at the last possible moment, using his momentum against him, and drive your own blade into his side as he passes. Not a killing blow, but deep enough to puncture his lung and drop him gasping to the sand. He tries to get up, blood frothing from his mouth, but his body won't obey. You stand over him, gladius ready for the finishing stroke. "Do it," he whispers, his voice barely audible. "Better to die a gladiator than live a slave." But the crowd wants mercy, and mercy, you've learned, is often the most profitable choice. You spare him, and he lives long enough to be carried from the arena, though he dies that night in the infirmary, his lung too damaged to heal. 7 fights, 7 wins. You're now officially past the point where statistics predict survival. Every fight from here is borrowed time, a gift from the gods, or a testament to skill that transcends normal limits. Your 8th opponent is something new. A woman. Female gladiators are rare but not unknown. Usually they're criminals or prisoners of war, forced into the arena like their male counterparts. But occasionally, a free woman chooses the gladiator's life for reasons that make sense only to her. Her name is Livia, and she fights as a retiarius, using net and trident with a grace and precision that makes other gladiators look clumsy by comparison. She's been fighting for 3 years, with a record almost as impressive as yours, and she's volunteered specifically to fight you. The crowd's reaction to a mixed-gender fight is complex. Some cheer enthusiastically, excited by the novelty. Others seem uncomfortable, unsure how to react to violence between man and woman, but all are curious to see how this unprecedented matchup will unfold. Fighting Livia teaches you that gender means nothing in the arena. She's fast, skilled, and utterly ruthless. Her technique with the net is like nothing you've faced before, using it not just as a weapon, but as a tool for controlling distance and manipulating your movement. The fight is a chess match played at lethal speed, each of you trying to force the other into a position where your preferred fighting style dominates. You need to get close, where your heavier armor and longer reach give you advantages. She needs to maintain distance, where her speed and the trident's reach neutralize your strengths. For 20 minutes, neither of you gains a decisive advantage. You're both too skilled to make obvious mistakes, too experienced to be easily outmaneuvered. The crowd watches in fascination as 2 masters of their craft probe for weaknesses that may not exist. The turning point comes when Livia attempts to repeat a net casting technique that worked earlier in the fight. But you've been watching, learning, and this time you're ready. You catch the net on your shield and use it to pull her off balance, creating the opening you've been waiting for. Your gladius finds the gap between her shoulder guards, a thrust that would have been fatal if she hadn't twisted away at the last instant. Instead, it opens a gash across her collarbone that bleeds dramatically but isn't immediately dangerous. She staggers back, assessing the wound, then looks at you with something like admiration. "Well fought," she says clearly, loud enough for the crowd to hear. Then she raises her hand in surrender. The crowd's response is unlike anything you've experienced. They're not just cheering, they're celebrating something they've never seen before, a gladiator fight that transcended the usual brutality and became something approaching art. As you help Livia from the arena, she speaks quietly enough that only you can hear. "I chose you specifically," she says. "I wanted to fight the best, to test myself against someone who would push me to my limits. Thank you for not disappointing me." 8 fights, 8 wins. Your name is now mentioned in the same breath as the legendary gladiators of previous generations. Merchants sell miniature figurines made in your likeness. Tavern keepers name drinks after your victories. You've become something more than a fighter, you've become a symbol, but symbols, like champions, eventually fall. Your 9th fight is against a gladiator whose very existence seems designed to end your winning streak. His name is Maximus, and he's everything you're not. Bigger, stronger, younger, and hungry for the fame that defeating you would bring. He fights as a secutor, the same style you've mastered, but with physical advantages that make every technique more dangerous in his hands. His gladius cuts deeper because he's stronger. His shield blocks more effectively because his arms are longer. His endurance lasts longer because he's younger. This is the fight you've been dreading since your first victory, facing someone who uses your own techniques but with natural advantages you can't overcome through skill alone. The crowd senses the danger immediately. This isn't just another fight, it's a changing of the guard, youth challenging experience, the eternal cycle of the arena where every champion eventually meets someone better. From the first exchange, you know you're in trouble. Maximus is everything you were 3 years ago, plus everything you've learned since then. He has your technique, but with the physical gifts to execute it more effectively. For the first time since your early fights, you're genuinely overmatched. Not because you lack skill, but because your opponent has equal skill, plus advantages you can't compensate for. Your 10th opponent destroys that assumption before you even enter the arena. His name is Titus, and he's not just a gladiator. He's a force of nature. 7 feet tall, built like a siege engine, with arms that look like they could tear apart bronze with bare hands. He fights as a murmillo, but with equipment scaled to his massive size. His shield is large enough to use as a table, his gladius long enough to serve as a normal man's spear. More disturbing than his size is his record. 15 consecutive victories, all by killing his opponents. Titus doesn't show mercy because he's never fought anyone skilled enough to deserve it. The crowd's anticipation is electric. This is the fight everyone has been waiting for. The skillful veteran against the unstoppable force, experience against raw power, technique against overwhelming physical dominance. When you enter the arena and see Titus waiting for you, your first thought is absurdly practical. How do you fight someone who's essentially a different species? The answer, you realize as the fight begins, is that you probably can't. At least not in any conventional sense. Titus's first attack comes close to ending everything immediately. His gladius, swung with the power of those massive arms, hits your shield with enough force to numb your entire left side. If you'd tried to block it completely, the impact would have shattered your arm. Instead, you learn to deflect, to redirect his attacks rather than stopping them, to use his momentum against him in ways that require perfect timing and more luck than you're comfortable relying on. The fight becomes a test of whether superior technique can overcome overwhelming physical advantages. Every one of Titus's attacks could be fatal if it connects cleanly. Every one of your counterattacks barely scratches his armor or flesh. You're fighting a war of attrition where your opponent has vastly superior resources. The only question is whether you can find a decisive weakness before your accumulated disadvantages become fatal. The weakness, when you find it, is almost anticlimactic. Titus is so used to overwhelming opponents with raw power that he's never learned to defend against truly skilled attacks. His technique is brutally effective, but fundamentally simple. When you finally manage to get inside his reach, past the range where his size gives him advantages, you find gaps in his defense that a smaller, more experienced opponent would never leave open. Your gladius slips between the plates of his armor at the shoulder joint, not a killing thrust, but deep enough to sever tendons and leave his right arm partially useless. Titus roars, more in frustration than pain, and tries to grab you with his left hand. But you're already moving, already looking for the next opening, already pressing an advantage that may last only seconds. The end comes when he stumbles, thrown off balance by the damaged arm and your constant movement. As he falls to one knee, your gladius finds his throat, the point just touching the skin above his gorget. For a moment, you're both frozen, you with your weapon at his throat, him with his massive hands inches from your body. Then slowly, he nods acknowledgement and raises his left hand in surrender. The crowd's reaction is beyond anything you've experienced. They're not just cheering, they're celebrating something they never expected to see. David defeating Goliath, skill triumphing over raw power, the impossible made manifest in blood and sand. 10 fights, 10 wins. You've achieved something that puts you in the company of legends, gladiators whose names are remembered centuries after their deaths. But as you leave the arena for the 10th time victorious, you realize something profound has changed. You're no longer fighting to prove yourself or to survive or even to win. You're fighting to maintain something that's become larger than yourself. A legacy, a symbol, a story that gives meaning to other people's lives. The weight of that responsibility is heavier than any armor you've ever worn. After 10 consecutive victories, the mathematics of gladiatorial combat cease to apply to you. You're no longer operating within normal parameters, but in a realm where fame, skill, and popular support create their own rules. Your living conditions reflect this new status. You're moved to private quarters outside the main ludus, a small villa with its own garden, servants, and library. You're allowed to eat what you want, train when you choose, even receive visitors from outside the gladiatorial world. More importantly, you now have significant input into your fighting schedule and opponent selection. The lanista still owns you legally, but practically speaking, you've become a business partner in your own career. This freedom comes with its own pressures. Every fight now carries the weight of public expectation. You're not just another gladiator trying to survive. You're the champion everyone wants to see, the standard against which other fighters are measured. The months pass in a strange suspension between privilege and danger. You live better than most free citizens, but every few months you still have to risk everything in single combat. It's a life of luxury punctuated by moments of absolute terror. Your 11th fight, when it comes, feels different from all the others. Not because of your opponent, who's skilled, but not exceptional, but because of what victory would mean. 11 consecutive wins would put you in truly rarefied company among the handful of gladiators in Roman history who transcended sport to become legend. The fight itself is almost routine. Your opponent, a competent Murmillo named Cassius, provides enough challenge to entertain the crowd, but never seriously threatens your victory. You win cleanly, efficiently, professionally. 11 fights, 11 wins. The crowd chants your name as you leave the arena, but the sound seems to come from far away. You're beginning to understand the loneliness of being exceptional, of existing in a space where few can follow and none can truly understand. Your 12th fight is against another champion, a gladiator named Aurelius who's won 15 consecutive victories in the provincial arenas and has come to Rome specifically to face you. This is what the crowd has been waiting for. Champion versus champion, the ultimate test of who deserves the title of Rome's greatest gladiator. Aurelius is everything you've learned to respect and fear in an opponent, skilled, experienced, confident without being arrogant, and hungry for the victory that would establish his own legend at the expense of yours. The fight is a masterpiece of gladiatorial combat, two masters of their craft pushing each other to the absolute limits of technique and endurance. For nearly an hour, neither gains a decisive advantage. The crowd watches in breathless fascination as two legends test each other's skills in a contest that could define both their legacies. The decisive moment comes not from superior technique, but from a simple human moment. Aurelius makes a tiny mistake, a slight overextension that creates an opening measured in inches and lasting perhaps a heartbeat. Your Gladius finds that opening, slipping between his ribs for a thrust that punctures his lung without quite reaching his heart. He staggers back, blood frothing from his mouth, but remains standing. For a long moment, you stare at each other across the sand. Two gladiators who've pushed each other to heights of performance neither could have reached alone. Then he nods acknowledgement and raises his hand. The crowd's reaction transcends mere appreciation for violence. They're witnessing something approaching art, combat elevated to a level where technique becomes poetry and violence becomes beautiful. 12 fights, 12 wins. Your name is now spoken in the same breath as the legendary gladiators of history. Poets write epics about your victories. Historians debate whether you're the greatest fighter who ever lived. But with legendary status comes a peculiar form of imprisonment. You can no longer fight ordinary opponents. The crowd expects champions, legends, opponents worthy of your reputation. Each victory makes the next fight more difficult because it raises the stakes of what constitutes a worthy challenge. Your 13th fight is delayed for months, while the Lanista searches for an opponent spectacular enough to justify your appearance. Finally, they settle on something unprecedented, a matched pair. Two skilled gladiators fighting as a team against you alone. The crowd loves the novelty, the David and Goliath drama of 1 against 2. You're less enthusiastic, understanding that the mathematics of combat change dramatically when facing multiple opponents. The fight tests every skill you've developed over 4 years in the arena. Against 2 opponents, you can't rely on superior technique or experience to carry the day. Instead, you must use psychology, positioning, and timing to turn their numerical advantage into a disadvantage. You succeed by making them fight each other as much as they fight you, using their desire to share in your defeat to create moments of confusion and conflict between them. When one falls to your gladius, the other's confidence crumbles, and the fight ends quickly. 13 fights, 13 wins. The crowd has run out of superlatives to describe your achievements. But you know something they don't. Every victory makes the next one harder to achieve, not just because of increasingly skilled opponents, but because of the weight of expectation. You're no longer fighting just for victory. You're fighting to maintain a legend that has become larger than any individual could sustain. Your 14th fight comes 6 months later, against a gladiator whose reputation matches your own. Marcus Brutus, son of the Brutus you defeated years ago. He spent the intervening time training specifically to avenge his father's defeat, studying your techniques, preparing for this moment with single-minded dedication. The fight is as much about psychology as technique. You're facing not just a skilled opponent, but someone who knows your style intimately, who's spent years analyzing your strengths and weaknesses. It's the hardest fight of your career, a brutal test of whether experience can overcome preparation, whether improvisation can defeat specific planning. For the first time since your early fights, you feel genuinely threatened, not just by your opponent's skill, but by his intimate knowledge of your own. Victory comes only after you abandon everything your opponent expects, fighting in a style you've never used before, improvising techniques that exist only in the moment of their creation. 14 fights, 14 wins. You've achieved something that transcends sport, becoming a symbol of human potential, proof that with enough skill and determination, any obstacle can be overcome. But symbols, like champions, eventually fall. And you can feel the weight of inevitable defeat growing heavier with each victory. Your 15th fight, when it comes, feels like a culmination and an ending. Your opponent is yourself, or rather, a young gladiator who fights exactly as you did in your early career, desperate, hungry, willing to risk everything for the chance at victory. Looking across the sand at him, you see yourself 5 years ago, scared, skilled, and absolutely determined to prove that he belongs in the arena with the legends. The fight becomes a contest between past and present, hunger and experience, the you who was and the you who is. It's the most emotionally complex battle of your career, not just because of its technical demands, but because of what it represents. The eternal cycle of the arena, where every champion eventually faces someone younger, hungrier, more desperate for victory. You win, but barely, and only because experience finally proves more valuable than desperation. As you help your defeated opponent to his feet, you see in his eyes the same respect and determination you once felt looking up at the gladiators who seemed invincible. 15 fights, 15 wins. You've achieved something unprecedented in gladiatorial history, a level of success that may never be equaled. But standing in the arena for the 15th time victorious, you realize something profound. You're no longer fighting to win. You're fighting to delay the inevitable defeat, to postpone the moment when someone younger, stronger, or hungrier finally ends your streak. The question is no longer whether you'll lose, but when, and whether you'll survive the experience. In the arena, even legends eventually fall. After 15 consecutive victories, you exist in a space beyond normal gladiatorial experience. The emperor himself requests private audiences. Senators invite you to dinner parties. Wealthy matrons compete to be seen with you at public events. But fame in Rome is a double-edged gladius. The higher you rise, the more dangerous your position becomes. Envy is as lethal as any weapon, and success makes enemies as surely as it creates admirers. Your 16th fight is delayed for almost a year, while the Lanista searches for an opponent worthy of your legendary status. During this time, you discover something unexpected. Retirement isn't just a gladiator's dream, it's a possibility that grows more realistic with each victory. The wooden sword, the rudis, symbol of freedom and retirement, becomes more than just a distant hope. Your winnings, carefully managed, could purchase not just your freedom, but a comfortable life beyond the arena. For the first time since arriving at the Ludus, you begin to imagine a future that doesn't end in sand and blood. But that future requires surviving just a few more fights, and each victory makes the next one exponentially more difficult. Your 16th opponent, when finally selected, represents everything you've learned to fear and respect. A gladiator in his prime, hungry for the glory that defeating you would bring, skilled enough to have a realistic chance of achieving it. His name is Quintus, and he spent 3 years building a reputation specifically to earn the right to face you. 22 years old, undefeated in 12 fights, trained by the same Marcus who taught you the fundamentals of staying alive in the arena. The fight is everything the crowd hoped for and everything you feared, a perfect storm of skill, ambition, and desperation that pushes both fighters beyond their previous limits. For the first time in years, you face an opponent who's genuinely better than you in multiple aspects of combat. Quintus is faster, stronger, and more aggressive than you've been since your early career. Only experience and tactical awareness keep you competitive. The fight lasts over an hour, the longest of your career, with both of you bleeding from multiple wounds, both pushed to the edge of collapse, both refusing to yield. Victory comes not from superior technique, but from superior will. The accumulated experience of 15 previous victories finally proving more valuable than youth and natural ability. Your gladius finds its mark a fraction of a second before his finds yours, and Quintus falls to the sand with your steel between his ribs, deep enough to end the fight but not deep enough to end his life. As you help him to his feet, he looks at you with something approaching awe. "How?" he asks, his voice barely audible over the crowd's roar. "Time," you reply. "I've been here longer than you have." 16 fights, 16 wins. You've achieved something that transcends human achievement, becoming legend made flesh, proof that with enough skill and determination, mortality itself can be challenged. But standing in the arena for the 16th time victorious, you make a decision that surprises even yourself. You remove your helmet and face the imperial box, raising your gladius in salute. Then, clearly enough for the entire Colosseum to hear, you speak the words that end your career. "Caesar, I have served Rome faithfully. I have given the people entertainment worthy of their support. I have proven myself in combat 16 times without defeat. I ask now for the honor of retirement, for the wooden sword that marks the end of my service in the arena. The crowd's reaction is immediate and divided. Some cheer, understanding that they're witnessing history. Others boo, feeling cheated of future entertainment. But all understand the significance of the moment. They're watching a legend choose his own ending instead of waiting for defeat to choose it for him. The emperor stands, considering. A gladiator requesting retirement after 16 consecutive victories is unprecedented. The decision could set a precedent that changes the entire nature of gladiatorial combat. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, the emperor nods. A slave appears carrying the wooden gladius, the rudis, symbol of freedom and retirement. As you accept the wooden sword, replacing the steel one that's defined your life for 5 years, the crowd's reaction transcends simple approval. They're witnessing the birth of a legend, the creation of a story that will be told for generations. You are no longer a gladiator. You are a free man, a legend, a symbol of what human will can achieve when tested in the crucible of mortal combat. Walking from the Colosseum for the final time, no longer as property but as a free Roman citizen, you understand that your real victory wasn't any single fight. It was surviving long enough to choose your own ending, to retire undefeated, to become the gladiator who proved that sometimes legends don't have to fall. The arena made you, tested you, and ultimately freed you. In the end, that's the greatest victory any gladiator can achieve. Walking away alive, with honor intact and future unlimited. 16 fights, 16 wins, and finally, freedom. Your story ends not with death in the sand, but with life beyond the arena. And that perhaps is the most legendary ending of all.